Hello everyone and welcome back. What you see in front of you is my newest version of my rainwater purification system. What I'll be doing today is going through the system step by step, showing you exactly what I've built and what the function is of each filter. One thing to note, if you're looking at this and you plan on doing something for your house, it does not need to be this complex. You don't need this many filters. I use this system for my business, in which for my business is making kombucha. Kombucha is a probiotic drink, beneficial for the immune system and the digestive system. I use rainwater as my water, like my ingredient. So because of that, I double purify my water. And I'll explain this in a little bit more detail here in a second. So starting off, I'll just show you where the water comes from, or where I keep my water. And this will vary between everybody. Everybody does this a little differently. But for my sake, I keep the water inside my building. Let me show you that right now. So there is a 300-gallon tank. And that is where I store my water. I don't collect my water here at my business. I collect it out in the country. I store it there, and then I transport it over here, 300 gallons at a time as I need it. On the top of this tank, there is a pipe that runs down to nearly the bottom of the tank, about a foot off the bottom. I do that so I don't pick up any debris from the bottom, and I don't pick up any debris from the surface of the surface level of the water. I believe the most efficient way to pull your water, they say, is 6 inches from the surface. However, I just didn't put a float in there, and I pull from a foot from the bottom of the tank. Let me give you a quick view of the top of the tank and show you how that works, and then I'll show you how the water then is led to the system, and I'll begin then to go through all the features of the system. Okay, you can see here on top of the tank, I have a hole drilled in the lid, and then I have a pipe that runs down to nearly the bottom of the tank. You see I have all this painted. However, I did not paint the pipe that I did not paint the portion of the pipe that is in the water. I did not want to do that. I then have a union right here. I have to loosen that union, I remove it, and then that enables me to open this lid. I fill it up with water, and then I close it back up. And then you can see here, it's kind of harsh, everything's brown. The pipe runs along the wall and then down and into the system. So I'll start there at that filter. That is a Remco spin down filter. So this is my first filter. This is simply just a sediment filter. Inside is a 250 mesh. They call it a Remco spin down filter. I know that a lot of water filtration is measured in microns. However, this is measured in mesh, and mainly I believe that's because this was built for irrigation, not particularly purifying water. So, and thank you YouTube for correcting me on this. In a previous video I had described mesh as being the amount of little squares in a square inch. However, the correct explanation of what mesh is means there's 100 little squares in a linear inch. So 1 inch this way all the way up, if it was 100 mesh, and this one's a 250 mesh. So there'd be 250 little squares in this linear inch. And as we move this way, the mesh size goes up, so that means like essentially, if you can see a little square, they get smaller and they catch even smaller particles. So the water is pulled through here and then through this pump, and this pump is an on-demand Remco pump. It is a Remco 5500 series, particularly a 5537. It has a 30-50 pressure switch in it. What that means is this pump will automatically kick on when it senses a pressure loss. When it goes below 30 psi, the pump turns on until it reaches 50 psi, then it cuts off automatically. The water then travels up here and then through this Remco spin down filter. But first, let me kind of explain what this is. The system is painted, so you might not be able to see all the valves that good. This is a valve here, and this valve is a bypass for the pump. And this allows you to back flush your system if you want it. Also, you've seen it when I had the camera back a little bit more. Here's all the wires for the pump. The pump is ran by a battery up here, and that's because this is a DC pump. I could get a inverter or converter, I believe they call it, so I can then plug it into the wall. However, I just haven't done that yet, so I just use this battery up here to run it. For as much as I use it, that battery lasts me quite a while before I have to recharge it. So, moving on, the water will go through this Remco spin down filter again, and what you see over this is a sunshade. Here's my filter itself. It actually needs to be clean right now. It is a little dirty. This is to prevent algae from growing. If you had these filters outdoors, even if you weren't using them for a system like this, if you were just using them for irrigation purposes, you wouldn't want the sun shining on them. So that's why they make these cool, like, it's essentially like a koozie, like a beer koozie. That's what it feels like. So this is a 500 mesh. So then it's filtering your water, it's filtering smaller sediment out of your water. After that, these pipes here, these two outlets, are for non-potable water. So that would mean like toiletry water, washing water, shower water, and also you saw my pressure tank that I showed you earlier. If I was building a home, I would put my pressure tank here, and then I would have pressurized water for my house. Moving on, this is another Remco spin down filter. However, this is a 1000 mesh. So if you could imagine 1,000 little tiny squares in this linear inch, that's how small those tiny squares are. And pulling out sediment that's even smaller. So it's important to know that your water is not purified right now. It is only removing sediment, getting it ready to purify it. So my water then travels over to the right and then down into my pressure tank. So now I'll show you where the water enters and exits from my pressure tank. Okay, on the left side here, you can see there's a valve, or you can see the black valve. That valve is where the water enters into the tank. There is a valve there because you need to turn that valve off in order to work on the system before that. So all those Remco spin down filters I just showed you, in order for me to clean them, I have to have the valve off like it is now, because I'm about to clean them. So I had turned it off. Water comes in there. There's a pressure gauge above. It shows you it's holding the water at pressure. Over to the right, you can see there is another valve, a red valve right here. I have that valve there so I can work on the remainder of the system, the part that I'm about to show you after this. So when I need to clean those filters, I have to turn that valve off so I don't have any pressurized water trying to come out of the filters whenever I take them off, whenever I remove the housings from the filters. So the water then goes along the wall and up into my carbon filter. So when it's traveling down the wall, you see now there is another red valve right there. That red valve is a drain for my pressure tank. So for any reason, if I needed to drain my tank, I can hook up some pipes or a hose to that and then just let the water run, or I can drain the water outside. Very important, I suggest having a valve before your pressure tank, after your pressure tank, and a drain valve. So we're not really there yet, but since we're down here, I want to mention something about my wall outlet. With that, you'll see I have 6 total outlets there, and that's plugged into one outlet, but it gives me 6 total that I can plug into. That is a surge protector. It's important to have a surge protector on your system if you're going to run any electronics, if you're going to have any electricity on your system, and that is basically, that helps with lightning. A lot of time lightning doesn't work well with water filtration stuff, or what do you want to say, like small electronics in general, even like such as computers. A lot of people have surge protectors on their computers. So that's what that is there. So the water runs down and then comes up into the carbon filter, and so let me show you that right now. Okay, so even before we get started on the carbon filter, you'll see that in order for me to remove my housings, I have all my filter wrenches here. I have another one there. This is a 10-inch carbon filter. Inside is a cartridge that I can remove. I could dump out the carbon, and then I can put new carbon in there. So I had purchased a 30-pound bag of carbon. That is the cheapest, most efficient way to be able to have a carbon filter. And carbon filters help improve taste, remove odor, and they can remove things such as chlorine by way of chemical absorption. What I would have done different is I would have bought a 20-inch if I was doing this brand new. However, I already had this from my previous system. If you've watched my videos, you've seen this filter on there. So if I was doing this over, or if I was building a whole new one, buy a 20-inch. You get more bang for your buck, and you're able to push more water through without having to clean it as much, because you have twice the amount of surface area. So then over here is a 1 micron bagged filter. Again, this is only pre-filtering our water, getting it ready to be purified. The water is not pure yet. This 1 micron bag filter is only $4 for the bag, and the bag is washable, so you can reuse it a few times. Best bang for my buck that I found being able to purify water down to 1 micron. There's also a pressure gauge on top here that shows you when the filter is becoming too dirty, that you need to replace it, so the pressure will go down. There's a little red there where it says replace. That is at 15 psi. So as soon as it's dirty, you'll know. The water then travels over to the right into my ceramic filter. Okay, so both of these are Dalton Rio 2000 ceramic filters, good for an entire home. So I've read some reviews on Amazon, and they're not too great about them, and I believe that's because people aren't using them correctly. I didn't use them correctly prior to having my pressure tank. Before I had these filters, before I had my pressure tank, I could only push about 70 to 100 gallons through these filters before I would have to clean them. And it's not that they were too dirty that they couldn't work and do their job and purify the water, because these are the filters that actually purify the water. They filter your water down to less than 1 micron, 0.9 microns exactly. And the reason why I couldn't get a lot of water through them is, earlier I was talking about the pump having a pressure switch on it, where it turns on at 30 and off at 50. Well, it would pressurize this, and then water would go through, but a second later the pump would turn off because it reached 50 psi. However, a second after that, enough water would be pushed through the system that it would go down to 30 psi. So it's kind of going to sound funny, but this is how my pump would work or sound. It would turn on and off very quickly, so it would sound like this. And it would just be on, off, on, off, on, off. And that's because the filters were a little dirty, and it needed a little bit more pressure to push it through, or it needed sustained pressure put on the filters to push them through. So that's where the pressure tank comes in handy. Since I put the pressure tank on this, I have been able to filter 900 gallons of water, and I have not had to clean the filter yet. And let me be clear, I'm only using one. You'll see I have these valves off here, and I have these on. So the water comes here, and it can't go to this filter. It only goes to this one. I did that because I want to see how much water can I push through this filter before I have to clean it, without even running both. So these filters are set parallel. So basically it means that they're one big filter. I'm not running it through this one and then through this one. The water can choose which filter it goes through. And I do that so I have to clean my filters less. and I had both of them already, so I wanted to set both of them up. So after the water is pushed through the Dolton Rio 2000 ceramic, it then goes here, see it comes up there, and then to a UV light. Now I'm going to show you that UV light. However, the water is pure now. After it's through this filter, it's pure and ready to drink. The UV light purifies it a second time. And again, I only purify my water twice because I use it as an ingredient in food. If you're doing this for your home, you can stop at a Dolton Rio 2000 and you don't need a second one. And you don't actually need the carbon filter or the 1 micron filter if you don't want. But it's essential that you have a pressure tank, a well tank, an expansion tank. They're all called different names depending on the type of tank you purchase. So now what I'll do is I'll show you the UV light, and then after that I'm going to talk a little bit more about a pressure tank, what it does and how it works. And okay, so you can see the UV light up here. That is a Sterilite silver UV light. It can purify 6 gallons of water a minute. Now it's important to know that if you're going to use a UV light for any reason, that UV light needs to be at the end of your system, the very last purifier. Now the reason for that is because you can't have any sediment larger than 5 microns going through there. If you do, then the bacteria or anything in there that you're trying to purify is going to essentially get shade from that sediment, and it won't fully purify your water. Another thing is you don't want your water to be very turbid. You don't want a lot of essentially like rapids or I'm going to butcher this name, turbicity in your water. Doing that will create bubbles, and those bubbles then can essentially create a type of shade for anything you're trying to purify. So that's why it's important to have this at the end of your system. Something else that I've learned through having a UV light now for a couple years is it doesn't like the difference in water temperature, meaning I used to keep my water outside. When I would do that, in the winter, the water would be colder on the outside. That cylinder, because the light is on the inside, gets warm. So when that cold water is pulled into that warm cylinder where the light is housed, it then creates condensation on that, and then it does two things. One, it fogs it up, which then doesn't let the UV light get through completely, so you lose, I'm going to butcher this too, luminosity from the light. So the light essentially isn't as it is just as bright. However, the water doesn't get, because of the fog, the water isn't getting the full effect of the UV light because of that fog. So that's one thing, and then that fog also creates condensation, which could end up being a problem and shorting out your light. I've had that happen to me once in 2 years, but since this is about 4 or 5 months now, I've moved my water inside. I haven't had any issues. You see up there to the left of the UV light, that is my monitor. That tells me how much life I have left on my light, how many days until I need to change it. And it tells me if the light goes out, an alarm will sound. And it looks like 66 now. I don't even know if you can see that, but it's actually 99. I have it upside down because that's the only way it would fit for what I'm doing. Now, this entire system is connected to 2 pieces of plywood that I had screwed to the frames of this wall. So I have 2 4x8 sheets of plywood, and that's what everything is mounted to. This is not mounted to the drywall. Okay, now let's talk a little bit more about a pressure tank and the different kinds and why I chose this one. So what I have a glass line pressure tank. This is what's considered a water over air tank. Now they also make another tank, I believe it's called a bladder tank. So a water over air tank means that really I only have about this much water in the tank. The rest of this is air, and that air is forcing pressure down on the water, and that's what's pressurizing my water. Now, this is considered a 42-gallon tank. Out of those 42 gallons, I only get 4.5 gallons of water before my pump turns back on. So I have a 4.5 gallon buffer essentially of water. So pressure tanks are great too, because if you have a home and you want to run multiple showers, you want to run the washing machine, wash the dishes, and take a shower all at the same time, it's essential you have one of these. Your pump will not be able to keep up. So they also have something called a bladder tank, which you can get a much smaller bladder tank that will do the same thing that this pressure tank does, because there's a bladder inside the tank, and that bladder pushes on your water rather than the air pushing on your water. So as I understand it, that bladder is filled up with air and then presses on the water and keeps your water pressurized. I chose not to do that. The only reason why is when I brew my kombucha, I only brew kombucha in glass-lined tanks. Glass is the best vessel to brew in, so I have very large glass-lined tanks. Because of that, it only makes sense that I put my water in a glass-lined vessel. Now I can't really do anything about storing the water in my large plastic food-grade tanks, where the 300 gallon I showed you prior. It's just way too expensive to buy nothing but glass-lined tanks. Price-wise, for a pressure tank, if you're going to get one, you're going to be looking anywhere from about the $200 range and up. Well, everyone, that is a quick overview of this system. If you have any questions or comments, just comment in the section below, or you can also email me. You'll have to go to the About section of my channel, and you can see my email there. I'm sure there's something I've missed on here, or I've even said incorrectly. So that's what's great about YouTube. Thousands of people will watch this and correct me in the comments, and I'm learning as I go, and I'm just sharing this as I learn. Well, I hope this is helpful for you on your journey, and if you like this video, please subscribe and share this videos so others can learn about water filtration and purification. Thank you all for watching, and have a great day.